I think we want to just start with the big idea. And people talk a lot about diversity and inclusivity and equity, kind of some reoccurring themes. But our definition of this really is that diversity is about counting the people, but inclusivity is about making the people count. And I think at the end of the day, what we're really all striving for is inclusivity. And we play a huge role in this because not only are we designing workspaces so that people can work effectively and efficiently, but the way that we design and deliver those spaces can determine whether people feel comfortable in those spaces, whether they feel welcome, whether it's designed for equity or not. And so this is a topic that we as a firm have really embraced. And I'm going to show you today. It's not really ready for prime time. We're doing a tremendous amount of research right now on this topic and developing a lot of internal processes and how we're going to go forward as a firm. But we also would be remiss if we didn't realize that we have a responsibility to design spaces that really start to address the concept and embrace the concept of inclusivity. And so I'm going to share with you a little bit of some snippets from that research today, while I talk a little bit more also just about neurodiversity in general as well. So I think it's important for us to start to realize that we are not all the same. We are all really unique, and the built environment that we live, work, and play with really does have an impact on each one of us, but it impacts each one of us in a different way. And so to truly design spaces that are inclusive, it's important for us to understand that the experience we might have is not the same experience that somebody else might have. Some people might love sitting in the open environment. Some people might loathe it. Some people want to sit right in the middle of everything. Some people can't handle that. They need their back to the wall. Some people have different sensitivities to sound or lighting levels, etc. And so we've really done a lot of research on that. But I think when we started really diving into diversity, one of the things that became important for us to really think about is what are the different cohorts or groups of individuals that make up, kind of this broader world of ours. And it's not just, sexual orientation or gender or race. We actually identified 9 different categories of different types of diversity. And we believe that we really need to be holistic and try to address them all. So those are racial, gender, sexual orientation. It could be, your social economic, it can be your age, it can be your physical disabilities or physical abilities. It can be your mental health or cognitive or neural health, which is also neurodiversity. And also your religious practices can have a huge impact on who you are, and it's just bringing your whole self to the work. And so when we really start to talk about these things, I think we've done a really good job addressing physical abilities and disabilities, right? With the American with Disabilities Act that now has kind of seeded a lot of things all around the world. We celebrated last year 30 years of that being in existence. And we've really dove into the neurodiversity piece, but we have to stop looking at this like we're taking each one of these cohorts as separate and unique and taking them one at a time. We really need to think about how can we holistically address all of these different groups and really make spaces that are more holistic for everyone. And so the research that we're doing right now really is diving into what are some of those practices and best things that we can be doing in the built environment. And again, I'll share a snippet with that of that with you towards the back end of this presentation. So I want to focus first on kind of the neurodiversity piece. We have really focused on this for the last 4 or 5 years because we got asked a very simple question. A client asked us in a meeting once, how do you design a space for someone that is ADHD? And I like to have answers for our clients. And I had an answer because we do a lot with education, and there's a lot of focus on how do we design the educational facilities and the sector to address that. But when it came to the workplace, there really isn't a lot of information out there that addresses how do we design for people that are neurodiverse. So we decided that we need to really kind of dive into this. And to date, we've published, there's actually a 5th report that just came out and a tool that is about to be launched as well. But the first 4 reports that we really put out, the first one we really focused on just defining what neurodiversity is. The second one was really about how is this evolving? Is it going to get better? Is it going to go away? And we talked a lot about predictions as far as we go towards 2030. And just as a spoiler alert, I will tell you it does not go away, and it becomes much more problematic and much more prevalent. So it's not something that we can ignore anymore. The third piece really was a piece that focused on the elements and the principles of design and dove a little bit deeper in how we specifically design for people that are neurodiverse. And then the fourth one was a video clip that really talks about the sensitivities and the hypo and the hyper. And then the last piece that isn't up on the screen that was recently put out was about pediatric in healthcare. And so our research on this continues to evolve. And I will say that we probably only published about 20% of the material that we have created to date. So you will continue to see this being pushed by us. So what is neurodiversity? Neurodiversity basically is a set of conditions that might include autistic spectrum disorder, Tourette's, attention deficit or hyperactive disorder, dyslexia, and or Parkinson's. Those are all things that are considered neurodiverse conditions. And what we would also say is that people that are neurodiverse are just kind of wired a little bit differently. But we actually kind of are all wired a little bit differently, and that our neurodiversity can also bring extreme strengths to us as well. So when you think about this, 1 in 7 people today is considered neurodiverse. That's a huge number, right? But the challenge is that less than 50% of the people that are even know it, because for generations, this went under or undiagnosed. Especially in women, it was grossly underdiagnosed because whether they're better at hiding it or they're more focused on, the male attributes. But there are a lot of people that don't even know that they are neurodiverse that are struggling and they may not understand why. And that presents a lot of challenges. So 85 to 90% of adults that have ADHD don't even know that they have it because, again, they were never diagnosed. And that when they go untreated, they lose on average 22 days of productivity a year. They can be 18 times more likely to be considered a behavioral problem or disciplinary problem, and are 60% more likely to lose their jobs. And depression is impacting 14.8 million Americans in the US alone, and that was before COVID. What we now know is that during COVID, the number of people that had depression really spiked incredibly high. In fact, the CDC said that in June of last year, there were 3 times as many people that were suffering from depression or heightened anxiety than the year previously. And that was just after 4 months of COVID. Now, after 18 months of COVID, it's probably even more significant than that. That 65% of the Americans that are on the neurodiverse spectrum have above average intelligence, yet 85% of them remain under or unemployed. These are really, really smart people, but they're struggling to be successful in the environments that we're putting them into. Now, why does it matter? Well, A, it's just the right thing to do, but they bring a lot of advantages. They tend to have extreme brilliance. They tend to be super focused on a task, and when they are, it's almost like they have a superpower. They tend to see the bigger picture, stretch the boundaries, think outside the box. This is part of the reason why a lot of people that are entrepreneurs are also neurodivergent. So Elon Musk, Richard Branson, right? 2 people who we watch do amazing things every single day are both neurodiverse. And so again, they tend to stretch those boundaries, think outside the box, and be bigger picture thinkers. They tend to have an amazing capacity for innovation. And often they can be super, super productive. So there was actually a study that showed that people that were autistic, that were focused on a specific task, were 92% more productive. Think about that. Not twice as productive, not 3 times, 92% more productive than their coworkers because they think differently, they process information differently, they see patterns where other people don't see patterns. And they can often thrive under pressure because, quite frankly, they've lived the majority of their life feeling an immense amount of pressure. And so again, these advantages really, for many of them, they consider it to be a superpower. Now, I love this quote from an autistic student that we talked to once, and he said that we are freshwater fish in salt water. If you put us in fresh water, we will function just fine. Put us in salt water and we will struggle to survive. And that is really true. And I think we need to understand that we are putting freshwater fish in salt water. And so how can we design the work environment to be better suited for everyone that's in those spaces? So let's break it down a little bit and just think about the fact that people that are neurotypical or fall into a predictable range of how they're wired, let's put those in the middle. And people that are neurodiverse tend to either be hypersensitive, meaning they can't take too much stimulation. It's magnified for them. So whether it's light or touch or smell or crowds or temperatures, those things can easily overwhelm and or distract them. But then on the other side, you have people that are hyposensitive. They actually need more of that, right? They need more movement. They need more activity. They need more stimulation. They crave that. And if they don't get that, then they can kind of feel like all this pent up energy in their bodies, and they tend to act out in a way. And it really comes across all of the senses, whether it's auditory, visual, tactile, olfactory, or even prophylactics. It's about how close we are to each other, the proximity to each other, and what's around us that we become very, very aware of. And we would argue that, if you're hyposensitive and you've got people that are hypersensitive, and it's affecting you across all these different senses, because you could be hyposensitive to one thing, but hypersensitive to another, then the only way that we can really design spaces is to give people options and choices. It's about creating an ecosystem where people have some control over the environments that they're in. And we need to design that across the portfolio so they can easily find the right type of setting for their need. Now, in our research, we really identified 6 modalities of work. Okay, so that really focuses on what are people doing at the workplace. And there are 6 things, whether it's concentrating or focusing, whether it's communing or processing information, right? So those are the types of tasks that you do alone, but you can do it together. So it doesn't need intense concentration, but you're doing individual work, maybe in a group setting. There are people that are doing creative work, or congregating, or contemplating, or convivial, where we're socializing and connecting with others. And then we need to realize that we need to create a hyper and a hypo version of each one of these. So when we start designing a kit of parts, we need at least these 6 modalities, and then perhaps different versions of that. And so let me just take the one on the left for a minute and start with concentrative. So I think most people, this is probably the one that we get right, in most environments, people have put in phone rooms or quiet spaces where people can go. They can take a phone call. They can try to eliminate the distractions that they might need. And that really focuses on that one modality and a hyper version of that, hypersensitive version. But if you're someone that needs more interaction and the only place that you can go is a closed box, you literally are kind of, you just can't handle that. So they might need a space that's off to the side, has a little bit of visual shielding, but they can move, they can stand, they can fidget, they can write on the wall, and they don't feel boxed in. Now let's add another layer to this. Let's add the layer of elements and principles of design. So providing that space is a good first step. But how you design that space is really important, because as designers, we want to have fun, we want to have great spaces, right? And so I can't pick up a design magazine anymore without seeing a picture of a focus room in some environment that's got bright colors and crazy patterns and things on the wall to get people excited and to make those fun places that people want to go. But the entire intent of those spaces is to limit the distractions or things that are overwhelming you. And so if I'm locked in that small room with a bright color and a crazy pattern on the wall, you have literally just short-circuited me and made my situation even worse. And so we really need to think about, how are we designing these spaces? Not just providing them, but how are we designing them as well? And that's how we really start to accommodate everybody. We also need to take an approach that these aren't rooms that should be relegated somewhere in the back or a destination. We need to seamlessly integrate all of these solutions into the environment, just like we do for people that have physical disabilities. We don't say this is the one place that you can go to where we can meet your needs, right? The entire space is designed so they have access to spaces just like everybody else. And so we need to do the same thing in a built environment. And we need to think about, how can we mix in all of these different things that we need, even in smaller spaces such as this. So when you start to think about this, we really can take even a small neighborhood and start thinking about, what is the hypersensitive and the hyposensitive version across those 6 modalities to really give people options and choices. So one of the biggest benefits that we're seeing right now is that a lot of people are going to activity-based working or free choice environments where you're not relegated to a desk. Okay, because if I assign someone to a desk and they're stuck there all day and it doesn't meet any of their needs, they're in a horrible situation and they're not going to be successful. But if I empower them to get up and go to a space that might fit their needs, which could change throughout the day, then not only do the people that are neurodiverse get to benefit, but even neurotypical individuals have different sensitivities. We all do to that stimulation. And so, or it could even just be a different task that I might be performing. And so creating these environments that have these various settings that address hyper and hypo and give people free choice is really what is empowering people to find the spaces that are right for them so that they can be most effective and productive throughout the day. So we broke it down even further. We took the 6 modalities and we said, okay, so we know that certain people are doing different types of work. Let's take this concentrate and focus. And we know that there's a science to design, right? We know that color and shape and massing and materiality, all of those things impact how we react with space. If you don't believe that, then go try to work in a dark, small closet. You wouldn't do that as effectively, right? Because it's too confining, you don't have the right setup, it's dark, right? So all of those things do impact us, and to what degree can vary from individual to individual. And so when we think about, what are the attributes that we know support analytical reasoning? Okay, well, you wouldn't go to a loud, crazy space to do analytical reason. You probably want something that is a little bit quieter, a little bit calmer. And the science really tells us, whether it's adjustable lighting levels or off the beaten path for limiting distractions, or regular, predictable rectangular forms or shapes and geometric shapes, adjustable furniture, cooler colors, all of those things really enable people to focus and do analytical work better. But now let's then also layer on the whole hypo or hypersensitive. So you can see in the bottom that for hypersensitive, when you need to block out those distractions, you might have more confined space or a little bit more control, or they might be more simplistic or semi-enclosed, and bright, some cool colors in there that make people feel calm and relaxed, and you can really focus. But for people that are hypo, they may not want to be boxed in, right? So again, they might need a little bit of shielding to limit those distractions, but the ability, whether it's to stand or to fidget or to write on a wall, those can be really, really important. And so it's about understanding the elements and the principles and how they apply across those modalities. So again, we know that people that are processing work and kind of doing that kind of stuff together, they often benefit from maybe green colors, a little biophilia, access to natural daylight. They still like some, regularity of patterns. But when you get creative and you start doing this, then you might have individuals that want brighter colors, higher ceilings, more biophilia, maybe brighter light levels, more stimulation and interest. things like that. And so again, we can dial this up or dial it down. So if you look in this image on in the hypersensitive with all the bright colors at the top, that really probably wouldn't be my preference of spaces that I would go to, right? But for someone that needs that extra stimulation and needs to stand and be able to move, that's a great spot for them. For me, I might want the space below where it's just, it's more a little bit refined, it's a little bit closed in. There's still a brighter color, but it's not, right in my face, it's the seat. But I still can have some, control over that environment. And so it's about tailoring the spaces and giving people the options across those modalities that really start to address those specific needs. And it goes for meetings and for contemplation and for kind of those social elements as well, where this might be spaces, you have, gathering space right in the middle, but you also have space off to the side that are smaller and maybe for individuals who want to be part of the action, but maybe they need kind of to be a little bit removed and they don't want to just be thrown into the middle. And you might have brighter ceilings and higher ceilings and brighter lighting and brighter colors in those spaces, or spaces where people can go and get active. So there is a compelling human and business case to be made for ensuring that we are designing spaces that really help with people being mindful and they address the health, the safety, well-being, and the inclusivity of all that are in that. So I'm going to just share some examples of some projects where these concepts kind of come into play. So here's a lobby. It's like any other lobby, maybe. But on the left side, high ceilings, straight line lighting, evenly lit for people that just need to get in, power through, and I'm going to start my day. But there are a lot of people that are going to be overwhelmed and they just need to take a minute and take a collective breath. And so on the right side, you have a drop ceiling with some natural elements in it, right? The wood and softer lighting and a little bit of color, and it feels a little bit more safe or protected. And so if you need to just kind of step off and catch a breath because you're transitioning from one thing to another, this gives you the opportunity to do so in a very kind of calming way, even in a very busy space. Reception areas don't have to be these boring reception areas where the first thing you see is a guy with a badge behind a desk asking, who are you and what are you doing here, right? How do we make them more welcoming? How do we incorporate whether I need to get a glass of water or it's hand washing? And how do we have things that are simple so they're not overwhelming and chaotic, but they're still inviting. So sprinkling in some hospitality elements, things that are very natural, brighter access, brighter lighting, et cetera. Those types of things can be very calming and reassuring and totally change the experience. When we talk about gathering spaces, sometimes it's about getting rid of the big table in the middle of the room and putting some chairs in and giving options for people that maybe want to sit in the back row because they feel a little overwhelmed or they want a little bit more space. And there might be somebody else that chooses to stand at that wall and be marking or taking notes and writing. But we have a drop ceiling, but it's kind of that diffused lighting, which simulates kind of lights coming through a canopy. So there's a natural element to that, even though there's really very little access to natural daylight, but it kind of simulates that a little bit. And it gives this sense of a higher ceiling without feeling like you're in this big vacuum space. So the drop ceiling kind of helps define the space and make you feel like you're in a safe zone. And if you'll notice, there are no walls at the end of this. It's fairly open, but yet the space is still kind of defined and laid out so that people will be comfortable. And we've introduced some colors, hopefully not too overwhelming, but just some colors that help create a little intrigue and kind of sparks people's creative juices as they go forward. We also believe that whenever we're designing something, it needs to be intuitive, right? If I have to explain to you or put up a sign that says what something is, I probably didn't design it well. And we are really running the risk of people returning to spaces where there are tons of signs all over the place that are telling us what to do because there's new patterns and new things that are happening and new protocols. But all that does is just kind of shout danger, 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 right? And so spaces like this that don't have a sign, but I'm pretty sure you can tell what you're supposed to do in this space, right? It's because of those elements and leveraging those principles of design. So whether it's the drop ceiling, the change in ceiling, the coloration, the different lighting, the softer materials, the change in carpet or flooring or fixtures, and even maybe a plant or some pillows or a throw rug that just say this is a space that's more casual, that's for refreshing and maybe softer connections, right? This is not a hardcore space. This is kind of where you can regroup, and it's clear, and it's an area that's defined to do that, of what you're supposed to do in those spaces. But we also need spaces like this, where people that have got all that extra energy in their body can go and get it out. And if we don't provide spaces, whether it's the ability to move or walk or pace back and forth, people that have that excess energy will really suffer because they have to be able to get that out of their system. And so having spaces like this where people can go, and people that need to be active can be, but then people that just need to kind of take a break or sit by themselves can also do that. So creating those balanced spaces is really important. We also can use color and materiality to really define how interactive you want to be, how you might be spacing, and also kind of creating these memory moments. That painted wall with the bright colors is the stairwell. And so I don't need a sign, right, that you will remember that. And it's a part of wayfinding that helps naturally navigate you through the spaces. And then spaces like this, really that embrace kind of the concept of prospect and refuge. So if you've been to a grocery store, you've probably been prospecting. You're looking down the aisle to see who is coming. Are they wearing a mask? Are they not wearing a mask? Is it safe for me to be in this aisle? We are all doing that now. And it goes all the way back to our animalistic instincts and Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If our basic instincts of safety and survival are not met, then we can achieve nothing else because we are just focused on that. And so having clear lines of sight where you can easily see what's coming, but also areas of refuge where you can pop off if you need to, or you can sit with your back to an open space, are really important to help people feel a sense of safety and security in spaces. So that prospect and refuge concept not only applies to people that are neurodiverse, but in today's world where everyone has a heightened sensitivity, it really applies to all of us. So we know that we all have unconscious bias. We don't mean to, but we are overloaded with information today. Tons of stuff is coming at us, and we need to be able to process things very quickly. And so we tend to take shortcuts, and often in that shortcuts, that means that we often tend to rely on stereotypes. And they're not perfect, but that's just kind of our way of processing everything that is coming at us. And we need to start to understand what those biases are so that we can design to avoid any kind of pitfalls. So there's really 6 common types of bias, whether it's likability or performance or maternal or attributes or affinity or kind of a combination of any and all of these things. But often we tend to gravitate towards people that look like us. Unconsciously, we just tend to do that. It's familiar. I know this. I think I'm going to be comfortable here. And so these are things that we all just need to be aware of, and we need to understand when we're designing spaces to help us kind of get over the hurdles. The next thing is that we really need to start embracing the principles of universal design. So we're dealing with a lot of clients right now. They're all asking, how do we address diversity and equity in the workplace? And the very first thing we'll say is, it's like a 9-course meal. You got to take it 1 course at a time. You got to start, what can you do? And one of the first courses is the principles of universal design. And there are 7 of those principles that really help us create space and address justice, equity, diversity, and inclusivity. So the first one is equitable use. And this is really about, can we make spaces that are easily used for the maximum amount of people? Are we designing for a niche, or are we designing for the masses? And can we, not try to segregate or stigmatize any specific users? Do it all inclusive and make it so it's easy for people to use. The second one is in flexibility, because we are not all the same. You've got guys that are 6'5", you might have women that are 5 feet tall. So how do we design for that range of individual preferences and abilities in the space? And so it's about providing, whether it's adjustments or different options or different scenarios. The third principle really is about simple and intuitive. Make it easy to understand. If I have to explain something to you, then it's not intuitive, right? And so we want to be able to create spaces that are communicating regardless of what language you're reading or if you're illiterate, right? And that is, the space is communicating the maximum amount of information that is helping people understand how to navigate in those spaces. The fourth principle of universal design really is about perceptive spaces, and it's about what is the space communicating to the users? We tend to walk towards the light, or darker areas might mean these are more private or quiet. We tend to drop our voices, etc. So how can we create environments that really help people understand what is the policies, the procedures, or the intent of these spaces? If everything is exactly alike, then you have no way of really understanding how to modify your behaviors at all. And so it's really important that we create with and design with perceptive design in mind. We also want to make sure that we're eliminating any possibility or minimizing any kind of hazards that might be in that space. So designing spaces with safety in mind is absolutely critical. And then the sixth principle of universal design is low physical effort. How do we make space as easy to use and navigate for the maximum number of people, regardless of their abilities? And then the seventh is that we need to understand that different users, again, might have different sizes, might have different reach, different body postures, different body sizes, different levels of mobility. And so creating spaces that are very easy for individuals to use can be really, really important, and make it so that whether they can use the space or not. Now, in addition to that, HOK has kind of gone in, and I'm going to just share a few quick snippets with you of some of the materiality that we've done. So we design space, and we have to acknowledge that if I design space well, it can have a positive impact on the individuals. But if I don't, it can have a negative impact. And so we've come up with a list of about 250 recommendations of things that we should be considering when we are going into the space. And again, this has not all been released because it's a work in progress and we're still refining all the details. But I'm just going to kind of show you maybe 2 slides of this. One is the access and entry. So if you can't even get into the building, it doesn't matter what you do in the building, right? You got to be able to get into the building. And I think first is thinking about the variety of communities and making sure that anything that we're doing is really being reflective and supportive of the communities that we're putting those projects in. We need to put a variety of projects in a variety of communities, and we need to make sure that they're reflective of that. We need to make sure that they're accessible, that they give a sense of safety and a sense of caring, because people that see that something is cared for, they tend to be safer because there's a sense of kind of territorialism, and somebody cares enough about this, so we'll go for a lower target someplace else, an easier target. We need to think about the routes in and out of buildings, whether they're covered walkways, whether it's safety, what happens if it's raining. And we also need to think about those transitions. We talked a little bit about those lobbies and how today, in the time of COVID, just getting to your office might be a harrowing experience. And so once you've arrived, you might just need to take a moment, kind of take a breath, and to be able to come in. So setting up spaces where we can have these easy flows and transitions are really, really important. And then another slide that just maybe shows some really basic principles about planning concepts. Providing micro environments can be important, and a variety of micro environments that people can choose from so they feel more connected to each other. Maybe that's the neighborhoods and groupings of individuals so they can stay connected. It's about providing those 6 modalities of work, right? It's understanding that all of those things are happening. And, you might be designing for an accounting firm, so they're doing a lot more concentrated work versus a creative agency that needs a lot more creative type environments. And so it's about understanding the business that you're designing for and providing varying degrees of those 6 modalities in both a hypo and a hyper version. It's about zoning. the spaces. And this is just a critical mistake that most people make, is that, they're putting really loud spots versus really quiet spots. And they're not really thinking about it. Well, I want it to be accessible, so I'm going to put it right there. But we need to think about how are we zoning spaces so that, the louder areas maybe are when you first come off the elevators, and now you're in the more communal space. And as you transition through the space, it progressively gets more private and or more quieter, or for more concentrative type work. So we need to be logical, and not every space on the floor should have the same lighting level, shouldn't have the same furniture, shouldn't have the same acoustic level. It should vary throughout to really reflect the type of activity that should be happening in that area. We need to kind of create this ecosystem, right? And that ecosystem needs to be able to support all of those different sensory elements that are coming at us. We want people to have options and choices. Again, if I'm assigning you to a work point that doesn't meet your needs, I can literally sabotage you and make it so that you can't be effective at all. So creating spaces where people have control is important. But we also have to acknowledge that some people really need kind of that set routine. And if they don't have that set routine, they can get overwhelmed really easily. So ensuring that we're accommodating both free choice, but also individuals that need that set routine are important. And then we probably need to provide some work points that have additional shielding. And I don't mean plastic shielding, but I mean, maybe it's a higher back to a space, or a panel or a screen that gives me a little bit more privacy or a little bit more control, that can help with the distractions, both visual and acoustical, but also maybe kind of define your space a little bit. And then really it's about providing a variety of options and settings, because again, what might work for you may not necessarily work for me. And what I might be doing in the morning might be different than what I'm doing in the afternoon. And so I want the options to be able to go to those different types of spaces. Having low traffic areas and having the ability for not everybody to be on a main corridor or a main traffic area where you're constantly being overwhelmed. Giving people access to quiet rooms, or maybe it's tech-free zones that people can go into where they don't have the pinging of technology, or they can turn off their email so they're not being distracted by that. And then again, that whole sense of prospect and refuge, and having areas that people can go and get away, whether it's just, I need a moment of mindfulness, or, oh my God, that meeting is unbelievable, or I'm going to go into a meeting and I need to prepare myself. So having these areas of refuge is really important. And it can also help people feel safe and not as vulnerable in those shared spaces. We believe that we are no longer just designing environments. We're really designing the entire experience. And designing for diversity, equity, and inclusivity is not a nice to have anymore. It's an essential, because companies today are being disruptive and they need innovative thinkers. And the talent pool is diminishing, and we need gifted workers. And it is the right thing to do. And all of us belong to at least one of those cohort groups. And we need to ensure that we're inclusive for everybody. So with that, Trevor, I'm gonna open it up for some questions and see if there's anything that anybody has, or any questions that you might have for me.
Yeah, so we have a lot of questions coming in, and thank you very much for spending some time with us. And some of the questions, we actually got a little bit of an answer as you move through the presentation. And so I just want to loop back and have the answers. So the first one is, could you just talk a little bit about and cover the benefit of neurodiversity for the employers?
Yeah, so I mean, we are going into a war for talent, and we are constantly looking for people that can help us. And people that are neurodiverse bring a different level of skill set. So I don't know if you've watched 60 Minutes, but there's a great piece, and Anderson Cooper is the lead reporter on this, and he goes into a company that assesses your ability to find patterns in materials, which a lot of coders do, or a lot of people have jobs where, where's the problem, or what's the difference, or did I get all the right parts, or, all of that stuff. And so he fails this test miserably because he can't identify the patterns and he can't put it away. But then there's an autistic gentleman who is employed there who literally does it in like a minute, like no time at all. And so, you know, clearly he's the better man for the job because he can identify and find those patterns. And so companies like Microsoft or Ernst & Young, a lot of companies that do a lot of analysis and data and processing or testing will often hire people that are artistic, that have that super heightened sense of focus. But different ideas, different people just bring different notions and ways of thinking that make us richer and make us think outside that box in ways that we might not do if we surround ourselves with people that are just like ourselves.
So the next question we have is just based on a little bit of a research that you've done. So have you done any research on the benefits of neurodiverse individuals working at home versus at the office?
Yeah, so what we know is that there are some individuals that just really get overwhelmed very easily and they cannot take being in those spaces. And so in many cases, the ability to work from home has been a godsend. But for others who need the interaction or who need the direction, it's been a nightmare scenario for them. And so, I think one of the challenges with neurodiversity is you can't say this is the guidelines that affect every person that is neurodiverse. They fluctuate radically from one individual to another. I mean, there's a lot of individuals that are neurodiverse have a hard time looking other people in the face. And so being on a Zoom call where you are literally feel like everybody is staring at you is just totally overwhelming, and they can't handle that. They really can't. And so it has affected different people in different ways. But I would say that several have benefited from it and others have really suffered.
Perfect. So the next question is a little bit on your experience. So have you seen any change in designing for neurodiversity throughout the past 12 to 18 months?
Well, first of all, I think the whole world is waking up to diversity. And I think this topic, literally 4 years ago, if I would have said the word neurodiversity, people would have been like, what is that? I don't even know what that means. And now most people, I think, know what it means. And I think many large companies have programs around it. And I think you're going to hear a lot more because it is a topic that is literally about to explode with a whole bunch of people coming out with consulting services, et cetera. But where it really is falling behind is in the design world, right? A lot of the conversations are about operationalizing and onboarding and hiring and recruiting and bringing them into your organization. But once you get them into your space, there's not a lot of people talking about the design of the space and the modifications that we need to make. And I think one of my favorite stories is right before the pandemic, I was in one of our offices. Probably shouldn't say this, but I was in one of our offices and I was sharing a bunch of the research with everybody. And one of the designers got up and ran out of the room. And I was like, oh, okay. It happens, right? And at the end of it, I said, oh, what happened to, Sarah? And they said, I don't know. And basically what had happened is I used the analogy of the focus room, and she was in the process of doing a set of construction documents where the focus room had this really bright pattern and a crazy colors in it. And she's like, oh my God, I have to go change that. So she got up and ran upstairs to change the design of the space based on the research. So yeah, I think we are starting to see people that have a greater awareness about, how do we apply this and what are the things that we can be doing to make spaces more accessible and tolerable for everybody.
That's incredible. So the last question is just a little bit focused on kind of what the first step is for offering a neurodiverse solution to clients. So what's a good way that you can go and really identify what solutions your client needs when offering a space solution?
Well, you are about to find out in the next week or two that we actually worked with a manufacturer to create a tool that would help their salespeople and designers select the material. So it's a flooring company. And, a lot of people are like, what does flooring have to do with this? But again, I remember what I said about a lot of people that are neurodiverse can't look people in the eye, so they tend to look down. If you're looking down all the time, you can easily get distracted or overwhelmed or disoriented if the flooring pattern is too crazy and chaotic, or if it doesn't help with wayfinding. And so we worked with this manufacturer to help them identify, how do you do this, and et cetera. So there is a tool that is coming out that talks a little bit about that. But you start with understanding neurodiversity. You start with understanding the impact that what you're doing has in the role. And literally, I just got right before this. I was on a call, and there was a design, and we were actually kind of critiquing the design, and it was just rows and rows of benching. And it's like, so there's no option, no choice, no place that somebody can have some shielding or some privacy. Like, just everybody's thrown out there into the exact same thing. And I think we need to wake up and realize that one size misfits all, right? And that if we want to create environments that people feel comfortable in, give them options and choices. I mean, can you imagine if we all had to wear a uniform and we all had to dress exactly the same every day? Well, that's what we expect a lot of people to do in the workspace when we give them one workstation and this is it for, 500,000 square feet, and it's all benching, just row after row after row. I mean, how horrible is that, right? And so how can we think about giving people options or choices or variety, or the fabric that you're putting on something that is meant to kind of be shielding and give some people some buffer, right? But then if you put this crazy pattern on it, it's like, oh my God, it's overwhelming. I'm not refreshed sitting here. I'm totally freaked out sitting here. So we need to start thinking with intent and purpose. We need to understand the science of design and start to apply some of these things to create the right environments so that people can be successful.
Well, I like that you ended it off with having a tool for kind of an action item for everyone on the call today. So we'll be able to find that tool for learning more about some of the projects that you're working on. So that is all the time that we have today. So Kay, we thank you very much for spending some time and sharing some of your knowledge on neurodiversity and everything that you talked about today. We're extremely grateful for having you. So thank you for joining us, Kay.
Happy to be here.